Hello, David Moore, Equity Advantage, and Mark Illsley of CBRE. And we're talking all things mobile home parks, and we're going to talk a little bit about RV parks. But you made a comment in the last segment. You're talking about what you actually own, and in those parks, you know, the owner owns the dirt for the most part, and practically speaking, it's sort of land lease situation. Which, you know, for those of you out there, if you're interested in exchanging into or out of a mobile home park, you've got to understand what you're doing. And even if you own the houses themselves, unless it's attached to the ground and deeded as real property, it's going to be personal property. So any money through an exchange that's earmarked for the personal property is going to be taxable as boot. So I just want to make sure people out there are aware of that. The same thing's going to happen when you're going away on the sales. So, you know, with that said, if somebody's going to come in and buy something, I mean, are there things, how's the financing work? You know, is it problematic in today's world? What's, you know, sort of the best practices going in these things, and what should people be looking for and looking out for?
Well, historically, and the reason why mobile home parks, manufactured home communities, RV parks were specialty is because of the financing. A lot of the traditional financing resources, especially institutional ones, didn't really understand them. The lending was more for community banks, federal credit unions, etc., until institutions started getting into it. And it's still kind of the case. We have had some federal credit unions that were very aggressive with mobile home park lending until the interest rates started to move, and then they came out of the market real quick. So buying mobile home parks of certain sizes and certain types, ages, for example, and where the average age of the units in place will also add to the credit worthiness or the risk. And so some lenders will loan and some won't. So we've had a changeover in the last few months.
And Mark, with your position, you know, first vice president of capital markets there at CBRE, I mean, you're not. I mean, we're talking to him from Oregon, but you're really not geographically limited. You work
correct.
What kind of scope as far as the whole country?
Yeah, it's primarily driven by relationships with CBRE, and I would say we have sold a mixture of mobile home and RV parks. We had a portfolio in Canada that we represented. We had properties down in Texas that I was working on, Montana, you know, just all over. And it's driven by relationship through CBRE primarily. So
you mentioned mobile home RV parks. You know, if you look on YouTube, you're going to see even, well, should I own a campground? I mean, can you sort of differentiate for the audience the difference where you see the lines between those different products?
Well, in my career, manufactured housing or mobile home parks had a certain zoning. RV parks had a different zoning. Sometimes the RV parks were zoned RV because there was a way to provide recreation attached to the RV parks, but the RV parks would operate only seasonally. And some of them in Oregon were placed near rivers that would ebb and flow. And so those tenants would have to leave the parks during a certain season because of potential flood. So you were able to use those properties for that use seasonally. But RV parks have changed now. It's not just recreation anymore. We've seen a kind of a sea change, especially in some of the development of new RV parks, where they're building them not for the weekend warriors or people to come in for long weekends or for a one-week vacation. There's a demographic of people who are living in their RVs, and I termed that a nomadic residence 5 years ago.
Yes.
Who are living in their RVs because they can't afford to live in other unit types, even manufactured housing or mobile homes. And so we are seeing people living in RV parks now full time.
I saw a news segment on a guy that had converted a box van into his home, and he was a college student. And it was just he couldn't afford to live the student housing, everything else. Come on, he was living in the box van.
Right.
That's pretty
it's
crazy.
Interesting how he could do that.
Yeah, and he picked the box van because it just looked like a delivery van, and he didn't want to worry about theft and everything else with a little motorhome or something. But
I met a lady who's lived in her small RV. It was a Mercedes RV. Probably cost her $110,000 brand new. She's been living in it for 2 years, and she drives from one to another. And she's a nurse.
Wow.
And she's been living in it. And she said, look, the only reason I live in this is that when I go home to sleep because I'm on 12 hours and I'm off 12 hours. And so I pick my contracts and I may go work somewhere, for a period of time and then move. And it's an interesting lifestyle for her to do that. She's, in her 60s. So
wow.
She gets to go all over the country and make good money doing it because contract nursing pays better than, if you're there full time, apparently.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So on the mobile home parks, I mean, you've got manufactured housing too, but I mean, you talked about double wides earlier. I mean, if you look at the classical single or the double, I mean, how has that whole industry changed in recent years? I mean, are the houses like a house you're going to live in? I mean, are they,
Right.
What are they like? I mean, as far as a regular home?
Well, interesting enough, 20 years ago or more, they were manufacturing a lot more mobile homes or manufactured homes than they are today. And that's because communities and states do not allow the development of manufactured home communities like they used to. So you need less inventory. Now, the Southeast, there is more and more mobile home park development there. But here along the West Coast, there are very few mobile home parks that have been allowed to be developed in the last 10, 15 years. So manufacturing of those units has dropped. But manufactured housing has become more expensive, not as much as housing and as multifamily, but it all comes down to, part of it comes down to the cost to manufacture and having people who know how to build manufactured homes, and then the availability of dirt or spaces. And even in the South, if you have a single wide, the price per land for that site, for that single wide and the higher density is cheaper than it is if you were to do a double wide or if you were to do, a double wide or triple wide with garages. So it depends on how you want to build those. And these are now built different than they were before. They used to be built with some of them 2x3 siding.
Wow.
Now it's 2x6 or
Wow.
2x4.
So it's built like a regular house, 2x6.
You're built just like a regular house, and you have all the energy issues, that are in there, the insulation and the roofing. You have pitched roofs now instead of flat roofs. There's lots of different changes, but that adds to the cost.
Yeah.
And so it depends on the community you want to develop. So one of our clients, Sun Communities, they've been looking for property in Oregon for several years, and they want to build 50 acres or more. Haven't been able to find anything.
Wow.
So.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, David Moore, Mark Illsley will be right back with you. Don't go away.